Hello and welcome to our AmeriCorps Vista member webinar, Establishing an Effective Relationship with Your Supervisor, where we'll be sharing strategies to successfully connect with your supervisor and get support throughout your Vista service. In addition to getting the most out of your service term, we know that these skills will be helpful moving forward in your careers after Vista. My name is Chris Hawks. I'm a training specialist for AmeriCorps Vista and a Peace Corps alum, or RPCV, from serving in Belize. And I'll be your host for today's webinar. You will also see our webinar support team, LSI, monitoring the chat and Q&A throughout the presentation. And today it's my pleasure to introduce our main speaker, Jennifer. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer to introduce herself a bit more. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you very much, Chris. And thanks everyone for joining us today. To share some context about my connection to national service, my first national service role was way back in 1998 as an AmeriCorps NCCC team leader. That included all the fun stuff like firefighting and disaster relief. I was then that region's interim community relations specialist, and then from 2004 to 2007, I served as the program officer for the Colorado State Office, developing and overseeing most of that state's VISTA projects and grants, as well as some senior corps and challenge grants. Teaching sponsor staff and VISTA members every operational and programmatic topic that arose was my favorite part of that role. My last position with AmeriCorps was as a management analyst, the Principal Advisor for Strategic and Operational Planning for the agency's Chief Grants Officer, which I left in 2019. So I'm thrilled to share some of what I learned, especially during my time supporting VISTA members and leaders in Colorado, with all of you today, as many of you get started on your VISTA service. Chris?
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And now that we have introduced ourselves, and kind of before we just jump into the presentation, just want to take a quick look at our agenda for today. So today we will cover a lot of ground, beginning here and ending with a short Q&A session. Mostly we will focus our attention on building strong foundations with your supervisor, including identifying what a supervisor is and starting off on the right foot. Also, communicating effectively with your supervisor, applying tested communication strategies, and navigating difficult conversations, all so you can build a successful and effective relationship with your supervisor, ensuring that you're connected and supported throughout your service term. So looking at the agenda, I'll pass it back to Jennifer. Jennifer, you wanna kick us off?
I do, thanks, Chris. So today we'll be exploring our topics with the help of a fictional VISTA member named Wren. So Wren's job is to help write grants at their VISTA project site, which is a local food bank. Throughout this webinar, we're going to hear about Wren's experiences and help them navigate their relationship with their supervisor. As you hear about Wren's experiences, think about how they apply to your own VISTA service. Let's begin by sharing how you each define an effective working relationship. You can reflect on your past working relationships and maybe what has worked well, or imagine what you're looking for in an ideal working relationship. So please take just a moment in the chat to respond to this question. How do you define an effective working relationship? Yeah, these are great. Keep them coming. So keep them coming, and I'm just going to call out a couple of themes that are really clear. The biggest one, as I'm sure all of you are watching the chat, is communication. And we're spending a good deal of today's webinar on communication. So right now off the bat, I'm going to add that communication, when I hear that, I hear also comprehension, right? So the whole point of communication is to understand and to be understood. And that takes a lot of the other things you all are mentioning about respect and trust. I love it. Thank you very much for your responses. And feel free to keep them coming, but I'm going to keep us rolling. So elements of an effective, positive working relationship at any level of an organization include a lot of what you talked about. You see it there on the screen: respect, trust, open communication, working together, support, shared goals, feedback. What's critical is that these elements be ongoing and mutual. What's consistent is that each element listed requires both people, to invest time and effort. And because of that, I recommend reflecting right now and forever on what you need to feel comfortable and successful in your workplace, and advocating for yourself. Those things, what you need, will differ for all of you. Now that we know some of the components of an effective working relationship, what can we learn today to help you build one with your VISTA supervisor? So your VISTA supervisor is your main point of contact throughout your VISTA service term. You'll interact with your supervisor through one-on-one meetings where you'll set your goals. You'll collaborate with your supervisor on work related to your VAD. Your supervisor will be able to handle questions and concerns that come up throughout the year, and will serve as your main point of contact and connection to the vast and wonderful VISTA network. Your supervisor is here to support you through your whole VISTA experience. So let's look at more specific ways that your supervisor can support you. When Chris, I think you wanted to mention something here.
Yeah, just a quick note, because you mentioned that, Jennifer. We know that every member's experience and every VISTA project is different. The same goes for your relationship with your supervisor. It's going to be different. Now, today we are going to stay focused on making the most out of this relationship with your supervisor. If you maybe are having issues at your site or need any sort of support in any way, we want to just call out that the VISTA Member Support Unit is a great resource throughout your year of service. So we just want to share that email in the chat in case it's helpful. And thanks, Jennifer. Just wanted to jump in real quick.
I'm glad you did. Thank you. So knowing the role that your supervisor can play is really important. Specifically, your supervisor can be an advisor, a communicator, a team builder, a planner, and a community partnership builder. Now, let's go into more detail of what I mean by each of those roles that I just listed. Your supervisor is an advisor. You can go to them when you're not sure, for example, how to interpret part of your VAD, or when you realize you need to build a skill to accomplish one of your goals. A supervisor can also communicate information to help you succeed. So proactively ask your supervisor, for example, how your recent presentation landed and how you could improve it, or how to reapproach a potential partner who seemed resistant, or maybe another staff member who doesn't seem to understand your role at your sponsoring organization. Yes, I'm going to address something right away that just came up in the chat. When I say your supervisor, I do mean your VISTA supervisor. So thank you for asking. Oh, and Lasada just answered for me. Thank you also. So a supervisor is also a team builder. And it's really important that you have someone who understands the stages of teams and how decision-making works. And you're welcome, Kristen. But you can check in when you're working on a complicated project with that supervisor as you go, and they can help you address smaller challenges before they become big problems. Next, supervisors can help you plan. If you've never facilitated a meeting or made an annotated agenda, or if you're not sure where to begin a significant chunk of work, ask your supervisor to give you feedback on your draft, on your initial plan. We're going to actually give you a few planning tools later in this webinar. And finally, supervisors can help open doors to your community, which is so important for so much of the work of VISTA members. Ask your supervisor who in their network could help you get a meeting with a key source of volunteers or funding. Check in about any history that might exist between your organization and the important individuals and other organizations with whom you're going to interact. The best part is learning how to quickly build an effective relationship with your supervisor in VISTA is terrific practice for all the future relationships you'll need to build and sustain with your future bosses and with your own teams when you are the supervisor. One way to begin establishing an effective relationship is to focus on building a strong foundation with your supervisor from the beginning. Again, we'll share a link later to tools that you can use to plan meetings. But before I get into this topic, and yes, Thomas, those tools will help you think about how you want to approach a meeting on the first day. Thank you for that question. I want you to respond again in the chat. We want to hear what you've done in the past to start relationships with supervisors on a positive note. So take just a moment to think about your prior experiences and then share your responses. And again, this one's in the chat. Excellent. Thank you all for contributing to this conversation. I see a lot of things you're going to see in this webinar: taking initiative, scheduling meetings, communication styles, and also some things that don't come up today but are super important: honesty and actually taking notes. And I love it. So it's great to learn a bit about your past experiences. A lot of you clearly have good things to share. So I hope everyone is keeping an eye on the chat and learning from one another as well as from us today. So it's clear that all of you have had experiences in the past forming working relationships, supervisory or otherwise, and know that one way to influence those relationships is focusing your energy on building a great first impression and connection. A lot of what you just shared was in advance and first and right away, which I love. When you meet with your supervisor, you can set the tone and connect really simply by asking something just like how they are. Don't make it hard. You'll also want to discuss expectations with your supervisor early on and develop an understanding of communication norms, not just between you and your supervisor, but also more broadly of the organization. Learning when to take initiative is a skill that'll serve you throughout your service term and frankly into your future career. And finally, as one or two of you have noted, ask for feedback. That's how you'll know what you're doing great and what may need some improvement. Now, I said all that really quickly, so let's look more closely at what I mean with each of those tips. When you meet your supervisor, and in every subsequent meeting, which many of you correctly identified, should be scheduled regularly, start with at least an initial personal connection. It's really just a little small talk, and if you hate small talk, I'm sorry, but in this case, I really recommend at least saying, "How was your weekend?" Right? And if you discover shared interests or experiences or find something you could learn from them, even better. You can also share a bit about yourself and let them know what you're excited about in reference to your position, maybe how it connects to your career goals. If your supervisor hasn't done so already with you, I know each of you are in kind of different places in your term of service, consider setting that regular time and place for that meeting. I love it. Someone just wrote about setting expectations. That's our very next slide. Setting those expectations and goals is vital to to both you and your supervisor's understanding of your position. Be sure to ask questions, and if any of the organization's policies are unfamiliar to you or you have questions about the outlined expectations in your VAD, voice your professional goals and see how they align with the goals of your position and your VAD. And if there's anything you want to gain experience in that isn't listed on your VAD, bring that up to your supervisor as well, because your supervisor is often well connected in the community and in a position to help you and may have the resources to connect you to other opportunities. Next, organizations use, I'm going to say this diplomatically, a dazzling and sometimes dizzying array of communication channels. So as soon as possible, you want to develop an understanding of the communication norms both with your supervisor and within the organization. Coming to agreement, for example, about how often you and your supervisor will meet is an important action item during your initial meeting. But also, it's great to ask questions and set an understanding of communication and meeting expectations. You'll want to discuss, for example, how to set meetings and which ones you should attend. Report on progress. How do you request time off? How do you ask for help? What are the right channels? Does the organization have existing templates or software systems or collaboration tools or channels that you're expected to use? And of course, if you don't know them, make sure you get someone to walk you through them. And finally, you want to observe something more subtle, which is the degree of formality used, especially by the leadership team when they communicate, so that you have the best chance of being understood and respected when you communicate. Again, communication, all about comprehension. And don't worry, we're going to dig deeper into the ins and outs of communication with your supervisor in just a little bit. Next, I talked about taking initiative, which is a skill you'll practice and hone, of course, throughout your career. All organizations, all of them, can be improved, as can most operational processes and talent management practices. Supervisors, anywhere, any level, almost always appreciate informed, thoughtful ideas about how to make things better. As a VISTA member, you actually have two built-in advantages. First, you're supposed to be making change and building capacity. That's a permission slip to make suggestions. Second, you have what I call newbie eyes, because you're coming from outside the organization. So particularly during your first few months, it's okay to ask with as open a mind as you can muster why something is done a certain way. Questioning the status quo, I know, can be seen as a challenge, specifically to the folks who maybe invented the current systems. So proceed with the respect you would want to be shown if someone asked why you do what you do the way you do it. Within your scope of work, step up to organize and plan tasks that help get the big picture goal accomplished and maybe better than it's been in the past. If you see a place where your talents could be used and you're not sure it's appropriate for your role, stop and ask your supervisor. That's what they're there for. Finally, I recommend that you proactively ask for feedback often. It's an opportunity to grow and improve, and I know it can be a little bit intimidating sometimes because maybe we don't always want to hear that feedback, right? But your service will be most beneficial to you if you can use feedback to grow. Be open to receiving feedback, and remember that an area for improvement doesn't mean you've necessarily done something wrong. Request guidance, right? If your supervisor advises you that you can improve in some way and you're unsure how, ask them for an example or a little bit more guidance. And of course, be proactive to implement the changes. To be clear, feedback should be ongoing, not once or twice a year as a formal performance appraisal. And the better you are at receiving and responding to feedback well, the more likely you will be able to give feedback in ways that others want to embrace it. Not sure how to give and receive feedback? It is a very challenging topic. And we will share a link in the chat to a recorded webinar on that topic that has some great tips. Oh, and there's the link. Thank you, LSI. So remember Ren, they're now connecting for the first time with their supervisor. In their initial meeting, they introduced themselves and asked some questions to get to know the supervisor better. Ren made sure to discuss their VAD, and the job expectations of the organization, and asked for initial feedback on how they've acclimated and performed so far. Ren brought up an upcoming event they'd heard about during orientation and asked how to get involved in the planning committee. Their supervisor connected them with the person in charge of planning the event. Ren left the meeting excited about their position, but a little confused about when they would talk to their supervisor next and wondering exactly how involved their supervisor would be going forward in their day-to-day VISTA activities. Chris?
Okay, so due to the confusion, Ren will need to follow up with their supervisor for clarification. And what we're going to do here is just open up a poll question, and we want to ask you, of these 4 options, what would you recommend Ren follow up with their supervisor about? So you have the expectations of their role, the time and place for a meeting to set the stage and connect with their supervisor, communication norms between themselves and their supervisor, or a demonstration of their initiative. What would you recommend between these 4 options? I already see a bunch of responses coming in, but give it another 15 to 20 seconds. Make sure everyone gets a chance to respond. Make sure you click submit at the bottom. If you do not see the poll pop up, feel free to type your answer in the chat. To the 4 you would recommend. Looks like the responses are slowing down. Okay, so I'll give it a little 5-second countdown, a little drum roll, and let's check out the responses. Okay, so the majority selected B, the time and place for a meeting to set the stage and connect with their supervisor. And then a bunch selected A as well. Now, in this scenario, we recommend C here. Now, Ren forgot to establish communication norms with their supervisor, and that's something that will prove to be very important going forward. So Ren should, make sure to bring this up in their next meeting with their supervisor, or better, follow up with them by email before then. As so many of you have mentioned in the chat responses already, that communication is key in these relationships, and communication goes well beyond crafting a concise professional email. So Jennifer's going to dive into more about the ins and outs of communication and how it applies to your relationship with your supervisor. But thank you all for your responses here.
Great. So effective communication, and again, that's communication that results in comprehension, that moves work forward and relationships forward, is at the heart of every professional relationship. So knowing how to effectively communicate can help you avoid conflicts and misunderstandings, improve productivity and efficiency, and ultimately make your service most enjoyable and impactful to your life and to the community in which you serve. Now, many of you may have heard of communication styles. That is a whole different webinar. What I want to acknowledge right now, though, is that there is great diversity in the way we each communicate. And that comes from all kinds of bits of our own background and experiences. But when you're establishing your relationship with your supervisor, one of the keys, regardless of your style, is to ask questions to understand more about their preferred style of communication and to share your own preferences. So ask your supervisor, how do they prefer to be contacted? And then share how you prefer to be contacted. This way you can establish a baseline for the communication and understand response expectations. For example, if your supervisor emails you, do they expect you to respond within 24 hours, 2 business days? Are there certain things either of you prefer to discuss via text or chat? Some people love to get a thank you or an acknowledgement of an email. Some people say, oh my God, please don't email me if all you're going to say is thank you. So you have to kind of work those things out slowly, but you start by asking the basic question. Now, circumstances also might dictate which form of communication serves you best. So you could ask your supervisor if they have any preferences or advice on how you might address any difficulties you have during your service term. For example, if you have a misunderstanding in reference to your badge, should this conversation be had live or via email or in a collaborative tool like Slack? So understanding the ways in which your supervisor provides feedback will help you interpret the feedback that you receive too. So I suggest asking your supervisor how they tend to give feedback, and that way you know what to expect. And here's what I mean. While finding out your supervisor's communication preferences, you get to also share your own and build mutual understanding. I think we can all relate to when someone says, "We need to talk," unspecified. It sparks unnecessary anxiety in almost everyone, right? Whether in a personal or in a professional context, "We need to talk" is like, whoa. Better would be, "I'm having trouble planning my volunteer engagement meeting with the YMCA. Could I get your thoughts this afternoon, say around 2? I think we need about 20 minutes. Whenever possible, give your supervisor context so that they can prepare to provide you with their best guidance. And then ask, if you can, for a specific time and even length of time so that everyone knows what they're committing to." So I'm curious if any of you, or many of you, know your communication preferences at work. If you have any notes, things you've already discovered about what works really well for you, go ahead and put those in the chat. Direct, yes. What else have you learned? Yep, lots of questions. These are great. So I hope you're watching because the diversity is astounding and wonderful in your comments. And the context matters. Look, I'm a trainer, so I also prefer a lot of times to be in person, but of course we know sometimes that's not possible. So what's the closest you can be if you like in person? And are cameras on or off when you do that? There's also a matter of urgency that a couple of people mentioned, right? That might change how you prefer to be contacted. A lot of you talked about direct and in writing. So again, make sure you share this with your supervisor and figure out how they prefer things as well. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, and some people really prefer email and don't want webcam. I think a lot of us are zoomed out after COVID. So it's great to share those things really candidly. Thank you. So as we communicate in our preferred ways with our supervisors and our teams, there are ways to design what we share to ensure that we're communicating effectively. And again, effectively means we are accurately understood. First, aim to be clear on the content and your communication goal. Share one idea at a time and provide enough information for your supervisor to understand what you are sharing and what you want, and to take action if that's what you're asking. If it's complicated, if it's lengthy, consider an informational email prior to having any discussion that requires decision-making, right? So you give that person the opportunity to process all of the context and information before you say, "Oh, can I do that?" Or, "Hey, what do you think?" Right? And being prepared means taking some time first to reflect on what you want to share and why, along with any applicable research, policies, or other relevant information before initiating a conversation about it. Again, you want your supervisor to see your purpose and that you've thought things through before bringing it to their attention. Now, awareness in the context of communication has to do with social intelligence and business acumen. In short, read the room. In addition to knowing the communication norms of your colleagues, consider what else is going on for them that day or in that meeting, or maybe what's their history with the project. Also, be aware of other aspects of professional conduct and norms that differ widely from how people dress to whether cameras are on or off during online meetings. Next, you can leverage your preparation and reflection to ensure that the way you communicate is intentional. Like, instead of sharing every feeling and every piece of information, be concise and focus on the essential information to share. Again, be clear on your expectations and your goal, and ask yourself, how will what I'm sharing move this work forward? Finally, choosing to highlight the opportunities and the strengths of a situation helps to set a positive atmosphere. If you need to communicate something difficult like a roadblock, bringing ideas for solutions, even if you know they're not perfect or they're not right, or even if it's just the next steps you could take, can help to keep the tone positive and forward-looking. And it's also very contagious to do that. Now, get a little more practical. One surefire way to build the respect of your new supervisor is by demonstrating your organization and preparedness when communicating. Let's talk about a few tools to help you do that. 3 things nearly all VISTA members do at some point during their service are convene and facilitate meetings, manage multi-step projects, and recommend solutions. All of them are easier if you have a little guidance, and we're going to provide templates to get you started. Before I get into what you can do, just a professional note, please, if someone takes the time to send you an agenda or some notes in advance, read them. I know it sounds basic, but I've been in a lot of meetings where still haven't read the materials, and it's pretty frustrating. It also gives you the opportunity to ask to add an item to the agenda for yourself if you need to. So first, a meeting agenda. When you ask someone to meet with you, send an agenda in advance. It can be as simple as a list of topics. What's better than a simple list of topics sometimes is adding the meeting details and what you want to happen with each topic. For your supervisor, for example, do you need them to make a decision, or are you looking for their input or their advice? For bigger meetings, especially if different people are responsible for different agenda items, add their names and the amount of time allotted for each topic once you've spoken with them about whatever outcomes and times they need. You'll also want to begin the practice of creating a meeting agenda that includes taking note of the decisions made and the actions that people committed to take, along with any timelines or deadlines. So you have a record of what was achieved during the meeting, and you can track your own work and follow up with people appropriately. This is particularly helpful for VISTA members who have multiple streams of work kind of going at the same time. If you can see when the crunch times and less busy times are across your various tasks, then you won't accidentally overcommit, and you'll see spaces in your calendar where you can work on maybe your own professional development or on ideas that are less central to your VAD objectives. Next, as you think about life after AmeriCorps, I know it may seem far away if you're at the beginning of your year, but I promise it'll be here soon. You will need to tell the story of your achievements and how this year of VISTA service fits into your next adventures. Keeping a log of those achievements formally, frankly, allows you to evaluate your own work and to tell your story with specific quantifiable outcomes in future interviews, in future keynote addresses. Who knows what you'll be doing someday? And if you're one of the VISTA members who applies for jobs in the city where you're serving and wisely ask your supervisor for a recommendation, you'll have a ready-made list of points that they can highlight to their network on your behalf. Finally, I've encouraged you throughout this webinar to be solutions-oriented. Doing that well requires you to analyze the solutions. Look at each solution, look at its price, not just in money, but also people and other resources. Look at its pros and cons. Maybe there are multiple solutions proposed. Maybe you're working with a team and there are differing ideas that maybe are even in conflict. This is a great way to compare them, and it's pretty easy. You can do this work yourself to prepare for a meeting with your supervisor where you intend to propose a solution and then basically convince them that one of those solutions is the best one. Or you can do it in small groups. For example, if you've invited a group of leadership volunteers to design a new recruitment campaign, You could have groups of 2 or 3 think through the top contenders from a brainstorming solutions, about creating that campaign. So let's go back to our pal, Ren. Chris?
Okay, yeah, back to Ren. Thanks, Jennifer. So if we look back at Ren's situation, so Ren has now been in their position for a few weeks and is unclear on one of the job duties listed in their VAD, which we know has never occurred in the history of Vista. So if scenario, how can Ren clearly and intentionally communicate this to their supervisor? So you see the answer responses here, so they can ask questions when the duty arises. They can tell their supervisor which parts of the task are unclear and ask how best to approach it, or email their supervisor, hey, I'm confused about my VAD, and give them some time to respond. Or the fourth option, bring up general complaints in their next one-on-one with their supervisor. So you see the answer responses here. Hopefully this one isn't quite as tricky as the last one.
They're nailing it.
Yeah, like so far. We'll give it another 10 seconds. Make sure everyone gets a chance to respond. Make sure you hit submit after selecting. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap it up. And thank you so much. And great job on this one. 83% got this one correct, which is B and for this scenario. So here, Ren should explain to their supervisor, which parts of the duty are unclear, and ask which steps they can take to prepare for it. Very similar to many of the tips Jennifer was just mentioning. But thank you so much, and we may revisit Ren in a bit, maybe or maybe not. I'll pass it back to Jennifer.
Thanks. So we're going to fly into one of my favorite topics, believe it or not, it really is, navigating difficult or sensitive conversations with your supervisor. Right? This is the best part of communication, I'm sure you agree. While we encounter conflict of some sort in all relationships, there are a few tips we can share today to help you in those moments. But first, what on earth do we mean by conflict? You can see that definition up there on your screen. As this definition implies, conflict may be inevitable, but combat is optional. While there are different conflict styles, accommodating, competing, compromising, avoiding, etc., there are overarching rules, approaches, and specific strategies that help in most situations. So I'm going to share some of those with you over the next several slides. First, following a few guidelines can keep sensitive conversations from spinning completely out of control. Assuming you're calm enough to engage, and if you're not, take a moment, take a walk, do what you need to do. Don't wait too long. Make sure the person or the people in the room are those who are directly involved in resolving the conflict, not everyone who may be impacted by the resolution at some point. Jot down a few notes to keep yourself on point. Take a deep breath, really, and begin. Critically, stick to the challenge at hand. Obviously, refrain from making personal accusations or judgments. They will just distract and offend people and get you absolutely nowhere. And focus on the specific issue rather than connecting it to larger systemic problems or bigger historic patterns. I know that may sound counterintuitive, but solving the discrete problem at hand will give you the momentum often to get to the bigger stuff, even if you don't get to it in that same conversation. As we mentioned earlier, when discussing the roles of a VISTA supervisor, coaching you through different conversations is something your supervisor can help you with. If the conflict is with your supervisor, I recommend calling a trusted friend and role-playing the conversation. Now, give you an approach. As I just said, and then begin your approach, right? Didn't give you one. So imagine your job duties are not quite aligned with what is listed in your VAD. This does happen. Or maybe you've been denied resources that you believe you need to fulfill your responsibility. Before you jump in, reflect as honestly and objectively as you can. If that's hard, ask questions of yourself from a place of curiosity. Curiosity is a superpower in conflict navigation. The questions might be, what might I learn here, right? What am I not seeing? Why is this getting under my skin? Or do I need to take 2 minutes or 2 hours and then reassess, right? Am I too in it? Then set up a time to talk somewhere neutral where you're unlikely to be interrupted, whether it's in person or virtually. When you set the time, you can include a shared goal. Keep it simple, like, I'd like to make sure I'm spending my time doing work that will move my VISTA work forward. Would you help me sort through what feels like some misalignment? You see how softly I said that? I mean, what you're saying is, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but there's a way to say it. After the conversation, thank the person for their time or support or whatever feels appropriate to you, and an email for that is just fine. As for the heart of the conversation itself, there are dozens of step-by-step models for walking through the thorny world of difficult conversations, entire books and courses. For today, we're going to share one model that you can adopt tomorrow, and it's called the STATE model, which is an acronym. It's from a well-known book called Crucial Conversations. Don't worry about writing that down. It's cited at the end of the webinar today as one of your resources. The first 3 steps you see on the screen are what you do. As clearly and objectively as possible, state the facts as you see them, and describe the events that happened and the impact that you observed. That you observed, not that 43 people told you they observed. Then ask for their perspective and listen deeply for where your stories align and where they don't. The 4th and 5th steps are how you do it. Talk a little tentatively and calmly, meaning you present your story as just that, a story, rather than the only set of facts that you are aggressively defending. You're also leaving open the possibility that you've missed something, and you're avoiding overly accusatory or overly forceful tones, right? Which again, just is going to put the other person or people on the defensive, and it's not going to move you forward. Encourage testing. Intentionally look for the opposing views to test your theory against additional information you might be hearing. In all of this, what you're trying to do is lower the temperature in the room so that you can talk to one another and talk with each other calmly and without a range of emotions that are getting in your way. Following these steps will help you stay on track and away from escalating things. And there are also 2 bonus tips, strategies actually, that I'd like to share as we come slowly to the end of our time together. The first strategy I want to give you is one you may have encountered. It's pretty widely known and pretty easy to apply. So just read the statements on the left and then the corresponding edited ones on the right, where we've owned the difficulty or the conflict instead of pointing a finger that would automatically put the other person on the defense. So first, instead of you aren't making any sense, you could say, I couldn't understand what you said, or I didn't understand what you said. Instead of saying you didn't care enough to come to the meeting, right? Sarcasm, by the way, always a road to failure, always in conflict. You might think it's funny, but I promise in conflict conversations, it doesn't work. You could say, I missed having your input at the team meeting. And one more example, instead of, oh, you won't be able to make the deadline, it's, I'm worried about meeting the deadline, which invites the person into collaboration. Second strategy for today. This is the simplest tool I have found to lay out frequently occurring conflicts, especially around role clarity and around processes. Earlier, I mentioned learning your supervisor's communication preferences and sharing yours. If you're already having tough time with something like how soon you're expected to reply to an email, that example I mentioned earlier, or how quickly to expect a response to yours, this little chart will help you lay out that kind of thing. It is particularly important to use with long-term, high-priority relationships. So I call this yours, mine, and ours, or your way, my way, our way. So do take a picture, take a thing, and go for it. So with that, we're going to return to Ren. Chris?
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And yeah, I want to note that we do have a Jamboard activity here, but just for purposes of time, we're going to share the link in the chat. Steve just shared it. Thanks, Steve. Just let's go to share some ideas on what best practices you will make sure to include when building a relationship with your own Vista project supervisor. So we encourage you to check out the Jamboard, and you'll have to go and include a sticky note if you've never used a Jamboard before, and you can go in, add your thoughts, and view others' responses, and we'll follow up tomorrow as well with this link, so you can view each one's response. And getting back to Ren, thanks, Jennifer. We do have another review question here for Ren's situation. So now, as Ren builds their relationship with their supervisor, we want to ask, what is the one best practice they should follow? So based on all that Jennifer was just mentioning, what is the one best practice here for Ren to exceed expectations of their VAD, respond to emails within 2 hours, communicate clearly and intentionally, or plan their schedule a month in advance? So which of the four? We'll give you a minute to select your response, and I'll come back in about 15 seconds. Like responses are slowing down, but still a few coming in. I'll give it another 5 seconds or so. A little drum roll. Okay, let's go ahead and close it out. And again, y'all did great on this one. I do not think it was as tricky as that first one. The correct answer here is indeed C, which many of you got that correct. Communicate clearly and intentionally. Thank you so much for your responses here and your participation here. So let's continue on. I'll pass it back to Jennifer.
We should definitely continue. They've gotten like A+ on the last 2 quizzes, so you know. We could spend days, y'all, days, weeks, even months discussing these topics further. In fact, I have. And there is a wealth of knowledge for anyone who would like to learn more. I mentioned the book Crucial Conversations earlier in the webinar, but check out all of these resources, all 3 of them, if you would like to learn a bit more. And these resources are also linked on the handout that you could download earlier and that will be sent to you later, so you'll have them again. So today, we discussed the benefits of establishing an effective relationship with your supervisor, identified tips for starting off on the right foot, and shared communication strategies. All of these tools and strategies are now in your toolbox so that you can have a successful, supported, and inspired Vista term. So Chris, why don't you talk with them about giving feedback and Q&A so that we can hear a little more from them?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jennifer. And yeah, so as you see on the slide, we would like you to take just a couple of moments to give us feedback on the webinar. We do constantly review the content. We try to make it better for future webinars, for future AmeriCorps members joining. So we want to know how we can improve it, what worked, what didn't, what could be added, what could be cut. Please let us know. We'll share a link in the chat. Steve just did. It also should pop up as you exit out of Zoom, but thank you in advance for completing the evaluation. And moving on, we do have some time here for some Q&A. So friendly reminder if you have a question, you can still submit that using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Again, please use that instead of the chat. We've seen some great questions come up in the chat, but and we've tried to jot them down and note them, but they can get lost because the chat moves fast. So I am opening up and just kind of taking a look at some of the questions that came in that might be helpful for the greater good. One, Jennifer, that came up earlier was a question regarding a really good question from Stacy in the chat that I noted, or Stephen noted actually, and it was regarding the one-to-one meetings. What happens if your supervisor's schedule is just kind of crazy schedule where it's different every week, so they don't have a consistent time and day for their one-to-one meeting? Have you seen that occur, Jennifer? And if so, do you have any suggestions for what the member can do to bring that up to the supervisor and maybe find a solution?
Thanks. That is a good question, Stacy. So thank you. It is absolutely common to be unable to have the same exact meeting time and place every week. And I've even experienced that myself. And, it could be for a whole host of reasons, travel or different time zones, or, I work all over the world, and sometimes it's insane. And what I would say is, first, some of the templates that I shared where you get to keep track of progress and decisions and actions and achievements will help you create basically like a written summary or an update that you can send to the supervisor, and you put that structure in for yourself. So you send that written structure to your supervisor, and I would do it weekly. It does not matter when, by the way, during the week, make it work for you. And when you feel that there's something where you do need your supervisor's advice, permission, problem-solving help, whatever, ask for that specifically related to the written content you submitted, and take a look. Most companies now have some shared calendars, or if your supervisor happens to be like really high up in the organization and maybe has an assistant who has their calendar, but figure out how to get on their calendar when you need them most, and they will soon see that you come in prepared. You've given them the written thing, and if they haven't read it, be prepared to brief them on, the 3 to 5 bullet points that matter about whatever you really need their input for. And as they get used to the fact that meeting with you doesn't take an hour, that you're prepared, you're organized, you have a specific reason, they will make time for you. And if they're traveling or they're sick or people are at home or whatever's happening, they'll make time even if it has to be a phone call or a quick chat or a text, which I know is some of your preference by the chat anyway. So Stacy, I hope that helps. Were there other questions, Chris, that you'd written down? There are some coming in on the chat, but I know you flagged some, I think, earlier in the webinar. I don't want to miss those.
No, go for it. If you see any, I do see a flood of questions coming in the Q&A.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to go
forward,
through a few of them in the minutes we have. So up at the top there, Thomas, should we have a plan prepared for our first day of service? Sure. And the best thing is a lot more listening than talking, right? So figure out who people are. Your first day of service, hopefully they have something planned for you. My hope would be they've arranged maybe for you to have lunch with someone if you're on site. If you're remote, then it's maybe certain meetings, people you have to meet with. I'm sure there will be paperwork, because isn't there always? But the best thing is just to make sure you have a moment to at least introduce yourself and talk about why you're excited. If you have been asked to come to a meeting, like with your supervisor on the first day, then look through your VAD in advance, see what makes sense, what doesn't, see what excites you, and just be ready to have things that you're ready to talk about, hopefully mostly on the positive side that first day, and go back to what we talked about in terms of establishing norms and expectations about how often you meet and look around, how are people dressed, how do they communicate, right? What do people do for lunch, and start to get the feel of the culture. The first day is really, you can be excused from almost anything. What if the supervisor seems to undermine what you do? Deanna, that is a really, really hard one. I like the word seems, it gives me a little hope. It kind of depends on the context. it's hard to figure out why that's happening. If it's happening, it's hard to figure out why, right? And what the payoff is. So what I'm hoping is that you have a VISTA leader or other VISTA members kind of ahead of you in their service term. And again, keep it really situational and issue specific and talk about what you observed, like the facts of the situation, rather than kind of your inferences and the story you're inventing around that. And see what you get back. You can ask for suggestions on how you might handle that or who else in the organization might be able to help you, right? So take it slow, and if it becomes a pattern, then you have to have a different conversation. I would also urge you to reach out to VISTA support if it's a pattern and you're really, really concerned that you won't be able to get your work done, right? Or if it's feeling really toxic in some way. Yeah, approaching a supervisor, Rosa, who is detached and not really engaged with what you're doing is also hard. Obviously, I don't know what your project is, but I hope that you have other VISTA members around you who can provide some of that community and that fun and connection and help. But again, I would actually go back to what I shared with Stacy. We don't know why the supervisor is detached, right? Who knows why? There could be a million reasons. But if you start proactively sharing what you're doing and asking for very specific, discrete support when you need it, you may find that you get it. And I sincerely hope that you do, but I would start there. Oh, and Stacy, okay. Also, what if you send in updates to your VAD and your supervisor, and then they go days, 2 weeks before opening and reviewing? Yeah, so, I mean, I would have to think to myself, I would ask myself why, right? So, oh, this is our last question, I'm told. I thought I'd give you all a heads up. I think you'd have to figure out why. Like, are they really busy? What's going on there? If it's consistent, like if it happens once, I wouldn't sweat it. If it becomes a pattern, then I would. And I would talk to VISTA support. I would talk to maybe another VISTA member, and perhaps there's a different way you could be communicating with that supervisor, or maybe it's just a really crazy time for them. That you can say like, oh, I'm having trouble getting a response, but I really want to make sure that these changes are okay before I move forward. How can I do that? And see if you get some suggestions from the folks who've been maybe at the organization a little bit longer. It's a really good question. These were great. Thanks for ending us with really thoughtful and important questions. I appreciate that.
Agreed.
It's been a pleasure being with you.
Yeah, and Jennifer, thank you so much for your guidance on the webinar and these answers to these questions. Really great details.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And also just another question that has been coming up is that this webinar is being recorded. It is, and we'll post it to the campus. It should be available to view the recording and access the handouts probably by tomorrow. And we'll send a follow-up email once that's done. So if you missed any parts or want to rewatch any of the tips that Jennifer shared, you'll be able to do that with the recording. And we also want to just plug our upcoming webinar for next month titled Developing a Work Plan from Your VISTA Assignment Description, or VAD. That will be on Wednesday, September 27th, and the webinar will be held at the exact same time as this from 3 to 4 p.m., 3 p.m. Eastern time, that is. And just very quickly showing you where you can register for that September webinar and view upcoming events. If you just log into the VISTA Campus account, click on calendar, and you'll see a blue or greenish dot that indicates there is an event for that day. So if you just go to September 27th, you will see the description up here below and a link to register for the webinar. So we certainly hope to see you there. And just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for serving as an AmeriCorps member, for serving your communities, and for your participation today. It was really great to see your comments in the chat, all the way from the beginning comments and the summer activities and throughout the presentation, and the great tips that and suggestions that you provided as well. We wish you all the success in the world this year. This will conclude today's webinar, so feel free to log off. Again, we'll follow up with the recording, but thank you so much, and thank you, Jennifer.
You're quite welcome.